Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome. Congratulations to each of the nominees. Mr. Brzezinski, as I'm sure you know, the Senate is going to be debating today sanctions on Vladimir Putin's Nord Stream 2 pipeline. This committee has long opposed that pipeline with an overwhelming bipartisan majority. But that bipartisan commitment has been fractured, but perhaps it is not yet cracked. And I and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are currently in an intense and granular negotiation over how best to proceed. I've imposed holds on a number of nominees at both the State Department and the Treasury Department in an effort to force the Biden administration to comply with the law and stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. My colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle disagree with the use of that leverage to try to stop this disastrous pipeline from going online. And indeed, it appears likely that we are going to be voting both on Senator Risch's sanctions legislation, which I emphatically support, but also what is functionally a side-by-side from Chairman Menendez that would impose sanctions on Russia if and only if Russia invaded Ukraine. Now, the reason that is suddenly so important is when Nord Stream 2 goes online, the odds of Russian tanks rolling into Ukraine will have increased dramatically. And my colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle know that. They understand that. It's anticipated that most, if not all, Democrats will vote for these sanctions on Russia after the fact if Russia, in fact, invades Ukraine. Among the sanctions they will vote for are sanctions on Nord Stream 2 after the fact if Russia invades Ukraine. Now, it strikes me that if it is not in America's interest, if it's not in Europe's interest, if it's not in the world's interest for Russia to invade Ukraine, the way to stop it and the time to stop it is before the fact rather than after the fact, by voting for the sanctions that both Democrats and Republicans have supported repeatedly, the sanctions that had worked, that had stopped Nord Stream 2, until President Biden surrendered those bipartisan sanctions in a massively unjustified gift to Vladimir Putin that has now put a target on Ukraine. The reason Chairman Menendez is introducing these sanctions is because the chairman understands the risk of Ukraine being invaded has increased and increased dramatically because of Biden's surrender to Putin. But of course, our Ukrainian allies are not the only ones who are endangered by Nord Stream 2 and by Russian aggression. When the Biden administration struck its deal with Angela Merkel in July, Poland and Ukraine together issued a joint statement saying that the deal, quote, cannot be considered sufficient to effectively limit the threats created by Nord Stream 2. And that calls on the United States and Germany to address the security crisis in the region, and that commits that Ukraine and Poland will work together with their allies and partners to oppose Nord Stream 2 until solutions are developed to address the security crisis created by Nord Stream 2. They further wrote, quote, this decision has created political, military, and energy threat for Ukraine and Central Europe, while increasing Russia's potential to destabilize the security situation in Europe, perpetuating divisions among NATO and European Union member states. Mr. Brzezinski, if you're confirmed, you will be our country's ambassador to Poland at a time when they feel that the decisions from President Biden have put their own national security at grave risk. And you will be faced with the challenges of understanding and addressing those very real concerns. First, I'd like to ask you, how do you understand the Polish position to be on Nord Stream 2, and do you agree with that position?
Thank you, Senator, for that very important question. Energy has been used as a weapon now for years by Vladimir Putin, particularly to try to weaken and intimidate Russia's neighbors immediately to the west. It is an incredibly important question, And when I appeared before this committee in 2011, in advance of going to Sweden, I made clear that I was against the pipeline at that time. I think it's a bad idea. And I note also that President Biden and Secretary Blinken have said the same thing. The Polish position, as you intimated, is clear. They are against the pipeline, and they are worried about what is happening in the East. Secretary Blinken recently expressed deep appreciation for Poland's vocal support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity in his phone call with Polish Foreign Minister Rau. He noted that the United States, Poland, and other allies and partners are united in imposing significant costs on Moscow for its military aggression and malign activities.
Would it be better to prevent that aggression before the fact or after an invasion occurred?
Absolutely, clearly before the fact. And I think it's important that Secretary Blinken is in Latvia today and yesterday to consult with NATO allies regarding what is happening in the East and what to do next. And then he'll go to Stockholm to meet with OSCE partners in part on the same topics. I can tell you, if confirmed, Senator, as ambassador to Poland, that I will be unwavering and deeply committed in support of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I'm going to work with Poland, our ally, and other partners to address Russia's destabilizing activities in the region. What Lukashenko has done on the border of eastern Ukraine in those forests in Białowieża is outrageous. And I will keep you and this committee apprised and consult with this committee and engage with this committee accordingly.
Thank you.
Senator Risch?
Very briefly, Mr. Brzezinski, I ran out of time, and I wanted to touch on one other subject that I